Okay, well, good morning, Boker Tov,
Good
or
morning.
Erev Tov, I should say, to David and Bonnie. It's evening over there, right? Or midday,
Good, yeah,
5 o'clock.
yeah.
5 o'clock. Okay, well, we're in the middle of the summer, and we are going to continue our class about the travels of the children of Israel through the desert. We're in a very interesting place, maybe one of the most intense few chapters in the Torah about their travels. We've looked at the episode. There was a fire that broke out in the camp. There were quail. Moses put up his hand and said, "Oi, how am I going to ever do this?" God told him to share some of the responsibility with the other elders. God gave some prophecy to the others. We had the case of the prophets loose in the camp, just prophesying. The quail again, and now we're going to finally get to another very interesting episode, the story of Miriam and Aaron challenging Moses, and when it becomes an important episode in understanding prophecy for many commentators, understanding Moses's nature, many things. So we're going to begin. And again, as always, we're looking at commentaries. We are together going through the text. So I'm going to just pull it up on my screen, and against all odds, Alan is here.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if I was going to be.
Good to have you. So here we are, chapter 12 of Numbers.
I was going to let everyone wander in the desert if I wasn't going to be here. Before I read, can I ask a question related to last week?
Sure.
We had the two people who were struck with the Spirit, the number 71 and 72, Eldad and Meldad.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just curious, is there any significance to the names? Because I just found, whenever I hear that chapter discussed and the two of them discussed, and I go, Eldad and Meldad, and I don't remember, names with that similar sounds, or two names with similar sounds elsewhere in our discussions.
Probably they were twins.
Sounds like a nursery rhyme, doesn't it? Eldad and Meldad.
Right.
Walked on the way.
Sounds like something I read to the preschoolers.
Yes. It's a good question. I mean, what does Dad mean? That's the question. Because let's see if we can find anything on their names. I've never heard anything. But let's see, maybe Ibn Ezra has something. No. Dad. I'm not sure what Dad is, but it does sound a little too close to each other. To maybe they were brothers. Maybe they came from a similar. So I can't find anything, but I'll look into it. Maybe there's a midrash somewhere that I'm not.
All right, it's just it's just question of curiosity.
It seems very possible, because the El and the May seem to be a prefix El. Well, El is God, and May can be who, or those are two powerful prefixes. And it does seem very curious that they have such similar names, and I can't think of any other names that finish in Dad. So it's there must be something there.
Okay. The commentary says that Eldad means God has loved, and I'm looking up Medad right now.
How are you looking it up?
I'm putting my finger right on the Hebrew word Eldad, and the definition comes right up at verse 26.
Medad is friendship and love. Yeah. So Dad, I get Dad is from like Yedid. Yedid means friend. So Dad must be similar to Yedid. So Eldad is friend of God, and Medad is
Love.
I'm not sure why May is glove, but I guess it must be some there. But those are two very positive names, right? There are some names that are very negative.
They must have been thought of very special when they were born and named.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, they're both friends of God or friends, so that it fits well with the story, doesn't it?
Yeah.
They got the prophecy, so it fits well. You know, wonder if there could be names that were changed but fits the story well. Thanks for asking that question.
All right, shall I begin?
Let's do it.
Chapter 12. Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses because of the Cushite woman he had taken into his household as his wife. He took a Cushite woman. They said, has Adonai spoken only through Moses? Has God not spoken through us as well? Adonai heard it. Now Moses himself was very humble, more so than any other human being on earth. Suddenly Adonai called to Moses, Aaron, and Miriam, come out, you three, to the tent of meeting. So the three of them went out. Adonai came down in a pillar of cloud, stopped at the entrance of the tent, and called out, Aaron and Miriam. The two of them came forward, and God said, hear these words. When prophets of Adonai arise among you, I make myself known to them in a vision. I speak with them in a dream. Not so with my servant Moses. He is trusted throughout my household. With him, I speak mouth to mouth, plainly and not in riddles, and he beholds the likeness of Adonai. How then did you not shrink? How then did you not shrink from speaking against my servant Moses? Still incensed with them, Adonai departed. As the cloud withdrew from the tent, there was Miriam stricken with snow white scales. When Aaron turned toward Miriam, he saw that she was stricken with scales. And Aaron said to Moses, O my Lord, account not to us the sin which we committed in our folly. Let her not be like a stillbirth which emerges from its mother's womb with half its flesh eaten away. Let her not be like a I just read that, sorry. So Moses cried out to Adonai, saying, O Lord, pray heal her. But Adonai said to Moses, if her father spat in her face, would she not bear her shame for 7 days? Let her be shut out of camp for 7 days, and then let her be readmitted. So Miriam was shut out of camp 7 days, and the people did not march on until Miriam was readmitted. After that, the people set out from Hazeroth and encamped in the wilderness of Paran.
Okay, beautiful. Thank you.
Pretty powerful stuff.
Powerful stuff, right?
Yeah, there's a lot going on here.
A lot going on here, right? Not a lot intense.
Is this after the Korath incident?
So this is before the Korach incident.
Okay,
Yeah.
I think that's important to keep in mind also.
Yeah. This is before they arrive for the first time in the promised land, right? The episode of the spies comes right after this. But any initial thoughts, just first of all, from the beginning of Miriam and Aaron speaking against Moses because of his wife.
I have a big question about that. Okay.
Yes.
Kush at this time, this is Africa. Yes, this is the Upper Nile, I believe, the kingdom of Kush. But that's just an aside. Okay. So
Yeah.
maybe, so it appears that she's African. Okay. But my question is, isn't this an intermarriage? Haven't the people of Israel been forbidden to intermarry with anybody who's not Jewish? They can't marry with anybody of the promised land, but they can intermarry an African. I'm real confused. I thought the juncture against intermarriage was very, very strong. I'm confused.
I mean, it's the confusion here is great in many levels, because as far as we know, his wife was Zipporah, who was Midianite,
It was Midian, yeah.
which so is
Also not of the children of Israel.
so his wife. Who is this? So the Midrash goes a little berserk with all the different possibilities of who this could be. Is this a different name? Just like Jethro has many names, right? Jethro is also Reuel, is Yitro, could this just be a different, is this someone who he picked up in one of the battles that the children of Israel were waging? And then there's a whole, I didn't want to go too far into that particular thing, so I didn't bring sources, but there's also a whole discussion about, well, is it really that were they upset that she was his wife, or they think that she was impure when they somehow they knew they were together? So he took a Cushite woman when she was impure as kind of, so they're all the commentators are trying to hedge what is going on here and why is it, what is this all about? We can look at something, let's look at the basic, let's just look at Rashi. But I think I wanted to go to the other part of rebellion. It's not super uplifting, to say the least. So here we go. Okay, or maybe this was this. So this is one of the interesting areas. So on the right-hand side, if you can see, and Miriam and Aaron spoke. So she opened a conversation. Therefore, Scripture mentions her first. Why is Rashi? Because why is Miriam is the only one who gets punished, right? So that's one way that I guess Rashi deals with it. And whence did Miriam know that Moses had separated himself from his wife? So now we're going into. Let's continue reading. We'll explain that. For this was a statement she made. Rabbi Nathan answered, Miriam was beside Zipporah when it was told to Moses, Eldad and Medad are prophesying in the camp. When Zipporah exclaimed this, she exclaimed, woe to the wives of these, if they have anything to do with prophecy, for they will separate from their wives, just as my husband is separated from me. It was from this that Miriam knew about it, and she told to Aaron. Now, what was the case with Miriam, who had no intention to disparage him? She was punished so severely. How much the more will this be so in the case of one who intentionally speaks in disparagement of his fellow? So let's read. This tells us that all agree as to her beauty, just as all agree as to the blackness of an Ethiopian. Okay, very beautiful. Kushit, the numerical value of this word is the same as that of Yefat Mareh, a woman of beautiful appearance. Because of the Cushite woman, because of her having been divorced by Moses, for he had married a Cushite woman. What is the force of this statement? It appears superfluous, since Alodot has been explained to refer to Moses having divorced his Cushite wife. It is unnecessary to say after that he had married her. It is made to suggest the following. You may find a woman who is pleasant on account of her beauty, but who is not pleasant by reason of her deeds, or one pleasant because of her conduct, but not pleasant of her beauty. This woman, however, was pleasant in every respect. Because of her beauty, she was called Ethiopian, just as a man calls his handsome son more, in order that the evil eye should have no power over him. What is all this about? So it seems to be that what he's saying is that this is Zipporah, right? According to Rashi, this is Zipporah, and then Moses had divorced Zipporah, And that actually, according to Rashi, they're angry at Moses because he separated himself from Tzipporah, and that she was beautiful, and the Cushite, calling her Cushite, was a compliment as to her beauty and as to her being pleasant in every way. And so this goes back to the idea that we know Moses marries Tzipporah, but we don't know what happens to her. We never hear anything about her. Here we'll do a little bit of going around. If we go back to Exodus chapter 19, 18, let's see.
Oh, no, there it is.
There we go. So this is when Moses is leaving Egypt and he meets Jethro. So Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, brought Moses' son and wife to him in the wilderness where he was encamped at the mountain of God. He sent word to Moses, I, your father-in-law Jethro, am coming to you with your wife and 2 sons. It doesn't say that he met his wife. It just says Moses went out to meet his father-in-law. He bowed low and kissed him. Each asked after the other's welfare, and they went into the tent. And we don't find anything else about Moses' wife until right now. So, but reading between the lines, our textual traditions say, well, there must have been some issue. Moses was separated from his wife, or he was not in speaking terms with her. Because it's strange. Why don't we find anything about his wife? Anybody have any thoughts about all of this?
If he is talking to God directly, why isn't he married to a Jewish woman? That's what I want to know.
What about that concerns you? I mean, have they received some dictum that they're not supposed to be marrying yet? I thought they had to wait a little while until the rabbis put together all the rest.
Oh, that comes later?
I don't know.
No, but that's interesting. But what's interesting to me about that is that even with all the warnings later, right after they get into the promised land, and while they're struggling with these horrible kings to stay in the promised land before they're exiled, and even after they're exiled, and during their exile, and after the exile, right? It's always about do not intermarry, do not intermarry, do not intermarry, do not intermarry. And maybe you're right. Maybe that starts the moment they step into the promised land.
It's before.
Moses married 2 women, neither of whom were Jewish. Is that why he couldn't go into the promised land? I don't know.
So it's the rabbis definitely build on it, but it's found in the book of Deuteronomy. It says, you shall not marry any women from the nations, and Midian's one of the nations, and Tzipporah is obviously a Midianite. There's the whole. I think there's other. We can go into a whole discussion about it, but there is some of the commentaries do talk about how he could be married to a Midianite, first of all, and if this woman is her too, is she the same, or she's not the same person anyway? But look, Moses married her before Moses spoke to God, right? Moses was a Hebrew slave who had ran away from Egypt, and he met Jethro, who took him in as a son, and he married Jethro's daughter Tzipporah, right? We're going to go back even further in Exodus when this happens. There's a nice euphemism where Jethro is very happy to suddenly meet Moses because he's looking for sons, right? So this is when so now the priests of Midian had 7 daughters. They came to draw water and fill the troughs to water their father's flock. But shepherds came and drove them off. Moses rose to their defense and he watered their flock, showing his good son-in-law material. When they returned to their father Reuel, he said, how is it you've come back so soon today? Answered, an Egyptian rescued us from the shepherds. He even drew water for us and watered the flock. He said to his daughters, where is he then? Why did you leave the man? Ask him in to bake bread. So asking him to bake bread, according to the modern scholars, is a way of saying, ask him to come in and marry one of my daughters. So it's a euphemism. So from the beginning, he has all these daughters, and so he identifies a good potential match, and then he takes Zipporah, and they have a son, Gershom, and another son. So, I mean, the family of Moses. Maybe we can go here with all this. The family of Moses is a very curious affair because we don't know what happens to his family. What happens to his sons? What about Moses's lineage? We know nothing about where Moses's lineage goes. There's one moment in the book of Judges where the commentators believe there's a Levi in this who comes up, and they believe that maybe that Levi was descended from Moses. But it's actually, I like that we don't hear about Moses' lineage, right? Aaron's the one who gets the lineage. Moses is a prophet, and then his family just disappears. We don't know what happened to them. We don't know.
Did they even go on the journey? Did Jethro and Moses and Zipporah and the sons go on the journey originally with Moses? We don't know that either.
I mean, it doesn't seem through these 40 years like Moses is someone who has a tremendous amount of time for his wife or his kids.
I don't think so.
And
then they use the word separate. In
Mhm.
Hebrew, is separate the same as divorce?
Let's see, we can look it up. Let's see. This is in Rashi that we saw that, right? I'm actually not sure how to access Hebrew Rashi. Let's see. Yeah, somehow I don't know how to access to Hebrew Rashi. All I can do is access to English Rashi. Oh, here we go. Okay. But it is true that the rabbis are the one who then bring all the more specific laws about who you can and can't marry and all. Yes, so it's a word for separating, porshin. But they were separated from their marriage. That's what they're saying. So I'm not he didn't say girushin, he didn't say divorce. He just said they were separated, which is interesting. It could be that what they're saying is that Moses was refusing to sleep with his wife. Because there are other commentators that said she stopped wearing beautiful jewelry. So they asked her, why have you stopped wearing beautiful jewelry? And she says, all interesting, and all has a different import as to how we understand Miriam and Aaron's comment, right? That's the basic of it.
Well, the thing that's really interesting, at least to me, is the use of the word tamuna when they're talking about Moses seeing God.
Mhm.
And if you take a look there, you see that what they've translated here as image or likeness. Maimonides has a chapter 3 actually, in Maimonides takes up this problem of tamuna and differentiates it from 3 other types of tamuna and from something that he calls, what did he call it? He called it tabneth.
Tavnit, I remember that chapter.
Yeah, the important thing is all of these things are derived from the visual sphere, the image stuff. It's all sort of a metaphor from image. But tamuna, the way Maimonides talks about it, and Leo Strauss's translation of that, is not from the visual sphere. And if you look at chapter 3 of Maimonides, the Guide for the Perplexed, you'll see that Strauss translates that with the tamuna you grasp the truth of God. He mentions grasp twice. Now, grasp is a tactile thing. So, if we're talking about trying to get close to Moses's experience of God, we have to sort of give up the visual metaphors and get into a metaphor having to do with grasping or touching or something like touching. And that turns out to be very interesting. And I would suggest you guys reread the chapter 3 of the Guide for the Perplexed. I mean, that's maybe an offbeat thing to think about in this particular case, but that certainly what drew my attention.
I don't think so. And then we're going to spend a lot of time talking about that. That's why I didn't actually I didn't copy paste any of the commentators for this first bit about because I think that stuff is very interesting. And I have very long commentaries I put for that. We'll get to it. I think it's really, I mean, to me, what's striking me as we're talking about it right now is that, later tradition based so much on these few little verses, right? Because they're coming from God's own mouth in the Torah, right? But it's really hard to know exactly if God is speaking in language that he wanted us to then parse, to the utmost degree, or if God was just making a statement or what exactly, but so much is based on this one verse, right? With him, I speak mouth to mouth, plainly and non-written, he be like God. Or so or to make myself known to them in a vision, by speak with them in a dream. So these verses are like so important to understand mystical life for thousands of years after this. But what did God actually intend when God was saying these words? Or what does the Torah intend in these words? It's an interesting thought. So let's get to the next piece, and we'll get to the likeness of God in a minute. As God spoken only through Moses. So the first one seems to be a personal attack on Moses. Let's forget what he meant by Kushit. The second one is even more personal. What did he mean? Has God spoken only through Moses? Has God not spoken through us as well? And God heard it.
Spoken through us as well.
Right? They're saying we're prophets too. What makes Moses so special, right? That's what they're saying essentially. And God heard them grumbling. God heard them speaking ill. And the Torah takes a break and says, now Moses himself was very humble, more so than any other human being.
Why bring in Moses' humility at that particular point? What has that got to do with his closeness to God, let's say?
Yeah.
So this is what they here. We'll get it. Well, let's go look. I think it's all linked together. So I'm happy we're doing this because we're going to get to the prophecy and also about how do we merit prophecy is also part of this whole thing. Okay. And this is where we're going to spend time. Ibn Ezra, Suzanne, could you read Ibn Ezra for us? And the Lord heard it, which is a strange statement, right? Does God not hear everything, right? God heard it. Go ahead.
And the Lord heard it, even though they spoke in secret and did not publicly criticize Moses. Miriam and Aaron spoke only to each other about this. They would not publicly discuss such an intimate matter.
So they're trying to lessen their guilt, but I'm not sure that's the shot. So here's a word for humble, which Ibn Ezra is translating as meek. Go ahead, Suzanne.
Okay, it was very meek. The word anav from the root ayin, nun he, meek, is similar to the word shalev from the root shin lamed he, at peace. Both words come from roots that end in a he. In both words, a vav has been substituted for a he. Its meaning is that Moses did not seek honor over his brother. Contrary to what Miriam had implied in verse 2, Moses did not consider himself superior to Aaron.
Okay. So I think, right, what it's saying is that, why is that verse come there, David's comment? Because they're implying that Moses considered himself better, right? That's what they're implying. They're saying, are we not prophets as well? So they're saying Moses thought he was better. It's not that different. What Nancy was saying, not that different from Korach's rebellion, right? It's a similar rebellion. Aren't we all holy? So they're saying, aren't we also prophets, right? A similar kind of rebellion. But it's saying, So let's read the Orach Chaim now. Suzanne, do you mind continue?
Okay. The reason the Torah chose this point to inform us about Moses's extreme humility is that it is best demonstrated here, where Moses was under extreme provocation and did not even complain to God. Had he responded, he would have revealed himself as not quite so humble. This, in spite of the fact that he could have given a convincing explanation for his conduct. The Torah goes out of its way to describe Moses's level of humility as, quote, greater than that of any other human being on earth. The reason is that one could have argued that it is impossible for a person who considers himself as inferior to everybody else to at one and the same time be the greatest prophet. This is why God himself had to answer Miriam and Aaron without prior warning. The sudden appearance of God was due to the insult, seeing that Miriam's words were an insult to Moses.
Okay. Right. Moses was so humble, he wouldn't answer if he was attacked in such a way. So the Torah had to come in and defend Moses.
Well, if Moses is the closest man to the divine and also the most humble man, there has to be a relationship between those two states of being,
Exactly.
two attitudes, or the two states of being. And it's very interesting to speculate what it might be.
Well, his ego was so little, right? And perhaps he was able to see God instead of only being so stuck on himself. But the connection seems to be definitely implied, right? A passage where we're talking about how the passage talks about Moses in two ways. One, his humility was without pair, and the other, his prophecy was without second. So they definitely seem to be connected.
Well, maybe if you're real, oh, go ahead, sorry.
Well, I was just thinking, could it not be the case that in order to really be a genuine prophet, you have to open up yourself to God and be a vessel for that communication, and an extreme ego or an overactive ego could actually block that means of communication.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting.
Or that sounds right. And perhaps you have to disappear into the divine, so you lose all sense of yourself. I guess that means ego too, but everything, personality, the whole bit. And as you disappear into the divine, you could be said to be very humble. I'm not sure what that feeling would be like exactly.
It could also be that when you apprehend God and God that clearly, and you see how great God is, it makes you feel very, very small, because you see how little human beings are compared to the beauty and perfection of the divine. So his humility comes out of his experience of God.
But but thinking about experiencing the divine, do you still have yourself when you're experiencing the divine,
Yes.
or is there just one thing there? So you in fact disappear completely?
Yes.
I guess I'm just thinking, though, the one way that we conceive of humility is not to think nothing of yourself, is just to know yourself in a realistic way and know where your limits are. So you don't lose yourself, but you know where your limit is and what you're capable of and what you're not capable of. So, I guess I've heard humility used that way, not a complete erasure of self, but just to know yourself so well, you know where you stand and you know what your limitations are.
Yeah, that's a good thought.
It's interesting that they translated it as meek, because Moses does not come across as very meek in the Torah.
No.
So it could be a different understanding of meek, or maybe, I think part of this might be a paradox that, when men and women of God do enough work on themselves, they get filled up with God and the power within them, which Moses is obviously has powerful words and powerful moments, and where he's got a lot of character, that's not, you can be both meek and powerful at the same time, or you can be both
Mhm.
completely humble and have a I mean, he's very strong, right? The way he speaks to the people, the way he speaks to God, the way he speaks to everybody. He could not come across meekly. If anything, he comes across fire to me. He kills the Egyptian, he strikes the rock, he breaks the tablets. I mean, it's
He
interesting.
scares away the shepherds.
He scares away the shepherds, right? We just
Yeah.
read about that. He's
Yeah.
a powerful guy. Okay, well, let's continue. Let's see what Ramban, Nachmanides. Nancy, do you mind reading for us, please?
Now the man Moses was very meek. This is stated to tell us that God himself was zealous for Moses' sake on account of his great humility, since he would never pay attention to injustice meted out to him, even if he were to consider it such, and therefore God vindicated his innocence. And Rabbi Abraham ibn Ezra explained the meaning of this phrase by saying that Moses never sought superiority over any person, nor did he ever pride himself at all about his high position, and certainly not in relation to his brother. Thus they, Miriam and Aaron, sinned by speaking against him for no reason. The slander was in connection with Moses' separating himself from his wife, which Miriam and Aaron attributed to his pride, as if to show he was a holy man. So it offended their sense of morality. We also received divine revelations, they said, and yet continue our conjugal life. But in the Sifrei, it is said, Sifrei Baha, Alotcha 100, Rabbi Nathan says, they spoke against Moses, even in his presence, as it is said, and the Eternal heard it. Now the man Moses was very meek, verses 2 and 3, and he restrained himself about the matter. According to the Sifrei, therefore, scripture mentions Moses' meekness in that he endured their insult and did not answer them back, and that God was therefore zealous for his sake. Okay, that's very different. That's very different from what we've been talking about.
God, he didn't answer them. He did, and God came up to Moses' defense. Let's go to Aruch, who tends to comment on Nachmanides, adds a little bit more. So Nancy, please continue reading this bit.
Tur Harach, whatever the Hebrew says, and Moses was an exceedingly humble person. According to Nachmanides, this line has been inserted here to explain why God himself had to defend Moses's virtue. Moses was unable by definition to defend his conduct without in the process losing his reputation as a truly humble and modest, unassuming person. Imagine how he would have appeared in the eyes of both Miriam and Aaron if he had used the very arguments on his own behalf that God used on his. Okay.
Interesting, right? Interesting to see how it's all. So let's go back and read that little section again in the actual text, just to familiarize ourselves with it again. So we have this line that the Torah brings. He was very humble. And then suddenly God calls out to Moses, Aaron, and Miriam. It says, "Come out, you three, to the tent of meeting," right? So the three of them went out. And then God came down in a pillar of cloud, stopped at the entrance of the tent, and called out Aaron and Miriam. And he calls two of them in. Only two of them actually go to the principal's office. So the two of them come forward. And God said, "Hear these words." And then he tells them the whole thing. "Not so with my proses, my servant Moses. Still incensed, he departs." Very, very interesting, this how he calls them all, and then the two, and then has this little speech with them, right? He tells them off. It's a rebuke. So let's continue going. Nancy, please continue to Aruch.
All right. To Aruch, suddenly, to both Moses, Aaron, and Miriam, Nachmanides writes that Moses was not present when God spoke to Aaron and Miriam. Nonetheless, the prophetic vision came to all three of them simultaneously. The significance of the word, I can't,
Pitom, suddenly, pitom, suddenly.
pitom, lies in the fact that at the time, neither of them had prepared themselves for receiving a prophetic vision. In fact, Aaron and Miriam were only granted their prophetic vision in honor of Moses, as otherwise they had never received such communications without having first prepared themselves for this in some manner. All the commentators agree that the word pitom indicates that the recipient of such perceptions had been totally unprepared for them. The word applies only to Aaron and Miriam, since Moses never needed to prepare himself in order to be on God's wavelength, in order to be able to immediately assimilate anything that God wished to tell him. Onkelos translates the word pitom, pitom,
Yeah.
as meaning immediately, without delay. God intervened while Miriam and Aaron were still speaking to one another about this subject.
But it's interesting, right? Because God says, I only appeared to Moses and speak to him face to face. But here he's appearing to Miriam and Aaron and speaking to them face to face as he's doing it. So it's an interesting, he's bringing them, and it must have also been very, suddenly, this is the only time we hear God speaking really to Aaron and to Miriam especially. So this is the God would call them specifically and speak to them directly. Maybe it also just that very experience would remind them God does this to Moses all the time, that you're nowhere, you're not at that prophetic level. Let's do one more.
But it does make them both special. Because God doesn't kill them. God doesn't kill them. And Aaron, this is not the first time Aaron has messed up. Okay.
Yeah.
But he wasn't punished the first time either. And he seems to slip out from being punished this time. I'm confused why Miriam bears the brunt of this when Aaron was responsible for the golden calf and he didn't get punished for that. Not really. But yet here Miriam has to separate and has a physical manifestation of the Lord's wrath. I mean,
not fair.
It really isn't. It really isn't.
Some commentators will say what happened to his sons was partly related to the golden calf, or that some other things that happened to him are due to his other. I mean, neither Aaron or Miriam see the promised land either, right? They both died too. So some commentators will say it's because of this whole episode. But Aaron seems to slip away from. He seems to make big mistakes, but somehow we never find God yelling at him in the same way that God tells off others.
Is that because he's the oldest, maybe?
He's the
oldest son.
He's the oldest son. Could be that God really knows who Aaron is and just knows that he's a flawed human being. And so he has higher aspirations for Miriam. Who knows? But it does seem unfair. But that's why we had that earlier comment where it says Miriam and Aaron spoke. And so because Miriam came first, they think Miriam was the one who started all of it. So maybe that's why she gets punished. But it does seem strange coming out of this story.
Not as bad as the golden calf.
Not as bad, nowhere near as the golden calf. And there again, the commentators go out of their way to try and take away culpability. He was trying to buy time, right? That's what they say. When he was making the golden calf, he was trying to buy time for Moses to come down. And he didn't realize it would all happen so quickly. He was worried that they were going to lynch him and his and Hur. So anyway, this is the commentators trying to make sense of something that doesn't make sense. Okay, let's Nancy, do you mind reading one more Torah Aruch and then we'll move on to it?
Sure. Go out, all three of you, to the tabernacle. God wanted that Moses should be there and should become aware that God himself defended Moses's virtue and his reputation. They would also become aware that God did not pardon Miriam or Aaron their slander unless Moses himself did so by pleading on their behalf, which he does.
So it's understanding, right? So that he calls all three of them so that Moses can see that God is upset, but then he actually speaks only to Aaron and to Miriam because he wants them to, Moses, he doesn't want Moses to hear the rebuke, right? He doesn't want Moses to, we're trying to understand why that whole order of events, but it's interesting. Okay. Let's do a little bit more. David or Bonnie, would one of you like to read the Rashi here?
And the Lord came down in the column of the cloud. He came alone to punish them, not as in the manner of human beings. When a human king goes to war, he goes with numerous troops. But when he goes forth peacefully, he goes forth with only a few. But the manner of the Holy One, blessed be he, is that he goes to war alone. As it is said, Exodus 15:3, the Lord alone is the man of war, but he goes forth for peace accompanied by his hosts, as it is said. The chariots of God are 20,000s, even thousands of angels of peace.
It's actually a beautiful comment there, right? When God's trying to make peace, he brings all of the angels when he goes to, but it's interesting because I think an overarching question is who comes out of this whole series of episodes we've been looking at for a month and a half looking good? Moses comes out looking exceedingly good, right? He's the most humble, he's the most powerful, the best prophet. He manages these difficult situations. And God also comes out powerful, right? God, even though they're speaking just himself, God comes out and he sets them straight. He sets Miriam and Aaron straight. Moses is the leader. He's the true prophet. The people also learning they can't eat quail. They've got to get used to the manna. I mean, everything kind of gets set into a better place by the end of all of this. I think that's a continuing conversation. Let's read this last Rashi because I think it just concludes well what we've been talking about. Okay, and then we'll finish by beginning to talk about, as promised, the likeness of God. Okay.
And they both went forth. And why did he bid them go further and so separate them from Moses? Because there is a rule that one should utter only a part of a man's good qualities in his presence, but that the whole of them should be told only in his absence. Similarly, we find in the case of Noah that in his absence, that is when scripture speaks about him, it says of him, a righteous and wholehearted man, whilst in his presence, that is where God is speaking to Noah, it states, for thee I have seen righteous before me. And it does not add wholehearted. Another explanation is God bid only Aaron and Miriam to draw near in order that he, Moses, should not hear the reprimand administered to Aaron.
Mm-hmm. So interesting, right? That why didn't Moses hear this? Either God didn't want him to hear all the beautiful things he was saying about him, because then he might not be the most humble man anymore, or because he didn't want him to hear him rebuke Aaron. I'm not sure why only Aaron and not Miriam. That I'm not sure why Rashi is going there. So let's go back and read more closely and begin at least that whole conversation about the prophecy. This is the most interesting part. And God said, hear these words, when prophets of Adonai arise among you, I make myself known to them in a vision. I speak with them in a dream. Not so with my servant Moses. He is trusted throughout my household. With him I speak mouth to mouth plainly and not in riddles, and he beholds a likeness of Adonai. How then did you not shrink from speaking against my servant Moses? Okay, so let's begin this. So now first we'll just go to Rashi, the very basic commentary on this. This Bimare Elav et Vada. This is the, let's see, what part of the verses? I just want to go back to it. Yeah. When prophets arise among you, I make myself known to them in a vision. I speak with them in a dream. So this is what Rashi is commentating on. This means the Shekhinah, the divine glory of my name, does not reveal itself unto him in a transparent glass, i.e. divine revelation, but it dreams and visions, right? This is the famous aspacalaria, which is the, right, in medieval times, it was very hard to make a mirror, right, or a magnifying glass. It was always like blurry, right? I didn't know how to make a perfect in ancient times. But so it's, do you see God through a looking glass, through a perfect looking glass, as in you see God completely clear as if you're looking through perfect glass, or does it look blurry or not? So other prophets, they see God in dreams, they see God in visions, unlike Moses, who sees God very clearly. David, how about reading for us Orach Chaim, right? He's quite a mystical commentator.
God refrained from addressing Miriam and Aaron directly by saying, if indeed you are prophets, seeing that Miriam and Aaron themselves had implied that there were other prophets apart from themselves, as we mentioned earlier, they referred to the patriarchs. God was careful to include also those people in his remarks. Perhaps the reason God used the singular Adonai instead of the singular Adonai instead of the plural.
He will be instead of he will be. Yeah, go.
Emphasize still further the uniqueness of Moses as a prophet. God first speaks about the kind of communication with certain prophets received by describing them as a vision. There are three levels of recognizing God. The highest one, that does not require prophetic insight, is that which Moses requests in Exodus when he says, "Please show me your ways." At that time, the word meant that Moses wanted to become privy to the kind of information about God that is normally only granted to the soul after it has departed from the body. Moses was quite familiar with the insights that the righteous would be granted after death. God denied this request, saying that it is impossible for a living being to gain those insights. That level of insight is equivalent to the recipient experiencing divine light directly. Moses' level of prophecy was restricted to oral perception. In other words, God spoke to him and his ears heard, his physical eyes did not see a communication. A second next lower level of communicating from God is one where God radiates some light, resulting in the recipient receiving a tamuna, a picture. That's also the translation of that to picture is Strauss translates that as figure, and not, by the way. This figure has nothing in common with the way we normally understand the word picture. It is of the kind of picture which no living being other than Moses can perceive with his mind's eye. All of this is abstracted from vision. And the point is we may be looking at some other thing. This is why Moses is described as he can view the picture from God. A third level is one in which the recipient perceives the light which emanates from God and the source which seems to be very distant. It appears to a person like a candle, which seems able to provide light over a great distance. This is what the Torah referred to here as
vision. Yeah.
It is this which prophets other than Moses perceive. The Torah calls this a word of God by means of vision seen with the eye. By contrast, Moses is described as looking at a picture from God. concerning the matter of verbal communication from God. So they're picking the senses here. You got oral community, you got hearing, you got vision, and now you've got something through oral communication, which is hearing again. Concerning the matter of verbal communication from God to a prophet, God told Miriam and Aaron that whereas all prophets other than Moses received such communications only in a dream, not so Moses. He was fully awake and his mind was clear when he received such verbal communications from God. He did not have to reassure himself if he had correctly understood what he heard while dreaming. Secondly, whatever God relates to a prophet in a dream is not to be understood literally, but is in the nature of a parable or an image. The Torah has told us of numerous dreams which were prophetic communications to the person dreaming them, and all of which required an expert to interpret them. Jacob needed God to tell him over 20 years after the event what he had dreamt about the ladder had been a prophecy, not merely a dream. The prophets other than Moses were mentally overwhelmed when they experienced such prophetic dreams. When God speaks about appearing to prophets, this does not mean that they actually dream, rather it describes the impact of God's communication to prophets being similar to that of people who experience a dream while asleep. God always communicated with his prophets while the latter were awake. Only Moses was able to maintain his regular posture when God communicated with him. He did not prostrate himself or go into convulsions as other prophets or have some wonderful forms of ecstasy. Neither did he receive such communication in the form of a riddle or parable. Every communication Moses received from God was crystal clear, requiring no further elaboration. This is what the Torah means when it describes such communication as I speak with him mouth to mouth. All the Israelites saw that all the 53 times the Torah reports God is speaking to Moses and to communicate what he said to them, the message was crystal clear and could be understood by anyone with a command of the Hebrew language. The same applies to all the wealth of wisdom contained in the written Torah. Anyone who immerses himself in that part of the Torah will find that he can understand it. This contrasts with the writings of Isaiah and Jeremiah, many of which are extremely obscure, full of parables and enigmas. What did Ezekiel mean by the great eagle in chapter 17, for example? The prophecies of the so-called minor prophets, such as Zechariah, are even harder to unravel, so that none of us can be certain of the events to which these prophecies relate. We need
should we go a little bit more? Well, yeah, here, we might as well finish. Good stuff, right?
Yeah, interesting. We need to examine why the prophecies given to Moses were all so clear, whereas those granted to the aforementioned prophets appear so confused. Kabbalists explain that the phenomenon of man being a composite in body and spirit is bound to prevent it from being able to receive undiluted the spiritual input. Any attempt to subject man to such additional spiritual input upsets the fragile equilibrium between the forces in the body and spirit which constitute a human being. After all, we observe in nature that such opposites in fire and water can't exist peacefully except in heaven, seeing that the Creator himself has arranged it in his domain. It is only natural, therefore, that when a human being is called upon God, his body will tremble, be subject to convulsions. The only human being able to retain his composure when thus addressed by God is one who has succeeded in transforming the material part of himself into a perfect state that God has created in it, as we have described on numerous occasions. One man has achieved this, his body is no longer a hindrance to his receiving communications with God. He'll be able to do so as a matter of course. When there are no people around who meet these specifications and God has found Israel worthy to receive prophetic communication, he has no choice but to choose someone to whom he transmit his words in his word in a manner which upsets the body and mind of the recipient. As a result, the world abounded with prophets who had to receive their messages in forms of parables and riddles so that the equilibrium of bodies and minds would not be permanently upset. The reason we find that Zechariah's prophecies were even more enigmatic than those of his predecessors was he was the last of the prophets. Subsequent generation did not create an environment which God saw fit to communicate his words to prophets.
More.
Thank you. Interesting stuff, right?
Yeah.
Wow.
Good stuff. So it's really trying to explain it, and it's true. It's true. You read the Torah, and God's communications through Moses are very clear and are very direct. And it's true. You read the later prophets, that they're a lot more poetic. They're a lot more challenging to understand. There is something very different, at least, about Moses' communications to God that we find in it. It's 11:05, so we'll talk more about it all next week.